Right, because what I thought was this, right? There's an interesting detail people aren't going to realise about the RMRs, which is they keep forgetting the RMR only works off the points of the RMRs. It doesn't matter what you do. In theory, you could have won like IEM Cologne, but if you did shit in the RMRs, you're in trouble. So the problem is, ever since we came online and it got to the end of last year, because I remember at Flashpoint 2 and just before, it was actually the qualifiers for Flashpoint where Virtus.pro first started becoming good again. They'd all those months where they played not at all, basically, and they'd been semi-shit, but they got Kinder into the lineup, and they were banging. Like, obviously, they won Flashpoint 2 even. And then after that, Katowice, they're still legitimate, like they're in the final. If you remember, that was when the people were thinking, like, holy fuck, this is like the CIS era, because you've obviously got Na'Vi always. Then Gambit came along, then you had this team, and then on the outskirts, just as a dark horse, you had Spirit as well, and it was like, what the fuck is this? Like, in theory, they could have 4 teams in the top 4. They could literally, but this is what's tragic. I don't think people have been keeping track of this. Basically, even though Virtus.pro in other tournaments is still money, even when they're in the LAN at Cologne, they were actually still a pretty good team. You know, they were dangerous. Like they could beat people. Even though in theory they probably are a LAN team. In the RMRs, they are in a fucking bad spot because at the moment they're in the spot that doesn't qualify. And the problem is the gap between them and Forza and K23 is like 800 or 900 points. And basically, since you get so many points even for 5th, they almost have to just go fucking ham at this one RMR, otherwise they just won't be at the major. And someone like K23, like, you know, a bunch of Kazakhstani players you don't necessarily know that well, they might be at the major instead. And so I feel like this might be a tragedy because this team is clearly good and they've got their own super defined style. They've got star players, they've got Kinder and Jim, and, you know, they've got, like, basically, I just want to see the really good teams at the major. And I feel as though there's a world where there's a very real world where this team doesn't go to the major, no matter what the rest of the circuit. So, no, what do you think about this? What do you think about Virtus.pro?
Yeah, I don't know what happened to them in the last couple of months because they did just go on a straight downturn. I don't know, like, I think there was reports where they're considering a roster move already as well, which is just a shit way to go into.
It was implied they were going to cut Sanji, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's just to have that in the back of your heads going into the last couple of big events of the year is already going to make you perform worse. Like, it's going to put more pressure on you, depending on the player, obviously. But I think going into the RMR where basically your spot on the team is on the line, that can't really help the player who's spending his entire time on the server dropping guns for James and playing with an MP9 or a Deagle half the time. Like, Sanji is not a bad player if you actually watch him play. It's just the fact that a lot of what he does on the team isn't going to get supported. So I don't know. I think they probably are still in with a decent shot to make the major, I think, because Na'Vi and Spirit are in one group, and I think Gambit and in their group, the only team that I can see outside of Gambit offering them trouble would be probably Forza and K23, if that. Yes. So I think they're still in for a chance of getting a top 5 spot, and I don't really think they can get pushed out. But if they don't make this, then they sort of, I feel like they have to make a roster change at that point. There's not much that's going to redeem them in the current spiral they're going on.
See, the thing that is scary though, right, is you're kind of hinging on, like, you know, like Duncan said, because the gap is so big, right, that like even if you fall short, you're just done, like, immediately. Yes. But like even if you manage to excel, you're still kind of hinging on, like, these other teams, like
they need to fuck up, really,
to fuck up in some way, or else it still might not be enough. So it's always awkward when, like, the fate's out of your hand. One thing I will say is like what you said as well, Noti, is that they have fallen off a bit of a cliff as of late, right? And Dastan, the coach, did say they were going to make changes. That's also a statement he made heading into the first RMR, all the way back at the road to Rio. I think that was last year. He said the exact same thing when they were going into that. That was when they were still playing with Adren in the squad, and then it was actually the lackluster results there that led to Adren, you know, leaving that team, and then they bought in Yakinda. So you look at, like, what that did, and maybe at the time it's like, oh, that's not a great thing to say, but hell, man, maybe this team does need to change, because, like, I don't know what it is about VP. Like, their style was kind of cool when it was working because it looked so big brain and it was, like, very unique. Right? They could just win around in the final, like, 15 seconds after just holding map control for the entire round, and then it's just, oh, you've lost. And And in a way, like there's a very ugly beauty to that, you know, like there's a lot going on to hit those timings right. And there's a lot of teams that fuck up those timings. Na'Vi are a great example, by the way. Like the amount of times I've seen Na'Vi, especially on maps like Overpass, just lose
not on the bomb.
And it's like, what the fuck? Yes. You know, like you're trying to like relive this golden era of Na'Vi, like pushing in 10 seconds, but it just doesn't work. And that's why it is beautiful that VP were able to get away with it for so long. But I think when that is the style you're doing, and this is something that a lot of these slow-paced teams have learned, like in times gone by, even thinking back to, you know, like a Pronax's Fnatic back in the day, you know, like it's like everyone needs to be on the same page and you all need to have full faith in each other if that's the style you're going to play. And it does get me worried with, like, you know, Sanji being outlined as this guy who could get dropped, because if you don't have that same faith and if you don't have Sanji as this incredible support player we know him as, then are you going to be able to make that slow, very, very, you know, reliant on your teammates style work when you're constantly worried that, oh, I'm getting dropped after this, so what does it matter anyway? Like, I don't know. And honestly, I think VP maybe could even do with a change, you know, because it does feel like Yekindar's too much of a linchpin at the moment. And like his consistency isn't there yet. Like whenever we've seen him at the heights, man, this team looks unbeatable because he's like the one guy who doesn't subscribe to that mantra of I'm going to take it real low and slow. Like he'll just run around the map like a wild animal, man, and fuck people up. And that's like the little X factor that they have to try and open up rounds and then, you know, let Jane craft this fucking 4D chess maneuver to make it all happen. But I do, a part of me does feel like, you know, maybe you could get another Yekindar type where there's someone who is a bit more free flowing, and, you know, look to pad it out there, because Yekindar's consistency isn't really there. And in games where he goes quiet, VP just kind of become non-existent. And I think that's been a bit of a problem for them recently, right? He hasn't been having these incredible games, and that shows in the results because they've been bombing out of tournaments ever since that's happened. And now they're talking about restructuring the team. So clearly something's off. Because, man, like there was that point in time where it just felt like, yeah, VP are playing, they're probably going to make, you know, semi-finals at least. And that was like a safe bet. Like, and it wasn't even that exciting to watch them do it. You know, they managed to get to like the Astralis level of, fuck me, not these guys again. Like so damn quickly, because the style they play is just this slow style where you win it through attrition, essentially. It's like, look, if you can't play 100% for 60 rounds of Counter-Strike, you're fucked. and that was what it was like playing up against them. But it feels like teams have started to figure that out, started to get a bit better at dealing with it. And, you know, and you don't have like your same pop-off player anymore. So I don't know, VP are in a very rough spot right now, especially with the RMR points being the way they are.
For me, it's what you said at the end there is the key. If people can go check the record, even when they were at their peak, I did tell people this. One of the reasons I used to pick against VP all the time, like Flashpoint, I picked against them almost every single time, even though they obviously went on to win the tournament, is because I actually said the curse of being an analyst is when I watch the demo, I don't have any of the thoughts of like, yeah, but I like to do this against them. Like, I can just watch the demo as a totally objective observer. And when I would watch them, I was like, dude, some of this shit's just gimmick shit. Like, in theory, if people actually don't just think they're a worse team than us, if they just watch the demo like I do, and they take all their preconceptions out and they just look at what Jame and Yekinda are doing on the most opposite ends of the spectrum, it's like both of them can be figured out. Like in Yekinda's case, the whole reason he actually sort of like blew people away is because sometimes he would take like the most crazy obvious peak but with like no utility, and the fact and the whole premise is in your brain you're like, well, no one's just going to peak that again, and he would just shoot someone in the head with an AK instantly, and suddenly it's like a 5v4, and then at that point in time, by the way, if James baiting and lurking, then that works when you got numbers advantage. Like that's not even the downside, and then he comes in and wins around at the end. And I even used to think this is insane because both of these guys, the second one of them falls off, the other one's in trouble. Because the other thing that made them crazy was they were just a beta team when it was Jame before, and they would win like weird games. Yekinda obviously like broke the game open and made them amazing. But I always said, and even though I know he himself didn't believe it because he was putting in all those hours, it's like, Yekinda, mate, this is going to be the most, like, one day it will unfortunately be the most readable style. Because you sort of always go for the aggro push and you just do it, like, on your own. And basically, the second people punish you doing that, there's not going to be a refrag. Like, you're just going to be dead, and now it's 5v4. Exactly, whereas before, you were making it 5v4. You were making it OP as fuck. And on the James side, I actually will admit, it's very different to watch a player like that than to play against them. But the problem I think Jame had was this. When they were underdog status, if you're the top 10 teams, you don't play them often enough. So what happens is every other team in the world teaches you how not to play against Jim, because he does that insane, like, super passive off-angle style with the AWP. He never will peek into you. So every other AWPer's teaching you, like, well, he has to peek him, and they never does he? And as a result, he gets away. But when you play against the guy 10 times in fucking 4-month span, eventually you're going to figure out, like, these guys aren't morons. Like Carrigan, fucking Glaive, and all these IGLs aren't morons. They're going to figure you out. Like, they're going to go, right, like you were saying about JKS, they're going to have like utility for you, mate. Like, they're just going to smoke you out of a sight, and they go, well, Jim never pushes through. So, you know what I mean? Like, they're going to figure out your angles, and when they figure out those two players, that is VP, unfortunately. The others just sort of do a bit of everything. So I agree, mate. The problem is, even though when it was working, it was a very cool, unique style. No one had this style in the world. And that's why I think they excited so many people. The problem is, I do feel like they're one player away. Like, they got to change a player. Like, that like, you know, they were trying to make it kind of like when Boomich was in Na'Vi early on. Like, oh, he's sort of a meme, and he does crazy shit with, like, SMGs. It's like, is that a real thing? Is that a role? like, there's no such thing as a mascot in the game, bro. Like, what are we doing here? Like, you know, like, I noticed in Astralis they don't have a meme. Like, what are we doing? So I always felt like, unfortunately, one day those players have to be surplus to the crowd. Now, listen, Boomich has sort of turned it around in Na'Vi. He's kind of found, like, a way to make it work. I will add the caveat. When I say make it work, it's like he can die and then just give info, and then Simple's like, right, I'll kill both of them. You know, like, that doesn't really add up on a chalkboard, Boomich, if you don't have Simple there. But the problem is, I do agree on the Sanji one. First of all, they did just treat him like a fucking pack mule. Like, they just went, here's all the shit. And by the way, give me a gun every round. And then people are like, well, look at his stats. And it's like, mate, how could his stats be good if he's never gun? Like, what? You know what I mean? Like,
I'm thinking about it because, like, now that you can drop nades, Sanji is actually.
Oh my god!
Like, this guy's gonna have nothing.
I know. He's just stood behind, chucking nades at people.
I've seen Sanji have 4950, drop Jame and Op with no armor, and Jame drops him nothing. Like, not even a
No, right? Jim probably just buys himself a sidearm. Yeah, exactly. Like, I need a deagle actually as well, mate. So, nothing for you. Absolutely nothing. No, it's mental. So the problem is, he's the obvious person to replace. It just feels. And as well, no, I'm not being harsh, he is just he's not connected to the others. He's not from Kazakhstan. He doesn't have the history, you know. So I feel like they will just replace him. I will say, though, they're in trouble, because if you remember, as Na'Vi and the other teams found out, the way transfers work in the CIS region is like, it's almost like, I'll make a joke here, obviously. It's almost like they're back in the Soviet Union with like a central planning commission, and you're like, I'd like to apply to have this good player. And then they're like, no, he goes to a different region. You're like, oh, well, thanks. I'll apply again in 6 months. Like, dude, people in the West are like, just buy the player. You're like, it doesn't work that way there, bro. Like, no one, by the way, no one really knows how it works. And even more disturbing, they never say anything in interviews. And then they did that thing, note, you'll remember this, where there was just that really weird piece of news where it's like, Na'Vi and other teams are having a conference to decide how players will be transferred. What the fuck are you talking about? What is going on? No, sadly, because it's CIS region, no one was in that room. No one knows what the fuck was said at that meeting, you know. Like, dude, that's why I say, like, it feels like another world. Like, I try not to even speculate on who they can sign, because I don't know. I really don't know who you can sign.
That was the thing. When we were talking about it earlier, I actually went and looked at the VP Prodigy page, because that's the only team I can possibly see them just getting a player from, just because of that exact scenario. And I just don't know any of these player names. Like, they didn't perform very well in We Play, as far as I know. Like, Na'Vi has 2 rosters that have farm players for them.
Yes.
So where are VP going to get the good players from? Because Na'Vi have a junior and a youth team, where half the good like,
I love that one, by the way.
Sitting on.
That VP Prodigy squad in We Play, they were pretty ugly for the most part. It was hard to find much to be excited about there. Like, you know, there was some fun parts, like Rufire, right? He's like the older guy on the team, because they are all very, very young, but obviously he's 26, right? So he like bumps the team average up a lot. And so he's like the experienced dude, but like the only thing I really remember about VP Prodigy was Rufire, and the fact that he started playing like shotguns on Ancient in Cave, and like that's like the only takeaway I have from VP Prodigy was that, like, Rufire made the Mag 7 look viable on one map. And it's like, when that's like your takeaway, and you know, it's not like he's like a mad fragger either. He's like a very middle of the pack player. When that's the guy that you're paying attention to, it is a bit, you know. And the only other maybe promising guy I would have said there was Lomic, but he's an AWPer, right? So you don't want to bring him into this main VP squad where you've already got James, the fucking, you know, king savior of all AWP players. So yeah, I don't think you could bring anyone up from that team that would actually be an upgrade. So you would be left looking, you know, into the CIS transfer list, I guess you'd call it, but. Man, I don't know. It's so bonkers. Like some of the buyout numbers I've heard for CIS players that haven't even accomplished much.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, oh, you want 10 million for fucking Zerison from VP Prodigy? Oh, sound, you know. And by the way, it's not a real number. I did just make that up. I have no insider info there, but yeah, it is fucked, and I don't know who they're gonna get. But there's just so much talent in the CIS region, right? It feels like it should be an easy task if it wasn't for all this, you know, red tape in the way. Yeah, no, man, I don't know about VP. It's very, very weird. Like, oh, the other thing as well, like, I always look at them as like having so you remember like Get Right in an IP with everyone knows like he's lurking on you, he's stabbing you in the back. Sure. But it kind of got to this point where it was like you killed Get Right on A, and so now you're kind of going, well, there'll probably be if he's over here, right? And it's like they have the reverse issue of that on VP where like you're just on the lookout for the one mad guy doing stuff in your Kindle. And like once you found him, you just go, well, the rest of the guys, they're probably going to come at us very slowly and with very little, you know, like, so it's super weird how this team operates. And I think it's kind of a miracle that it lasted as long as it did almost. I think a lot of these teams in CIS as well, Fours are another one that I'll say do this. And this is something you were saying earlier, Thorin. When they're the underdogs, they look incredible, but it's like the moment they start to get up there, that's where it drops off. And dude, Fours are just like that. Like I'm a big fan of Jerry, the IGL of Fours. So I really like this team. But man, like with a lot of these Jerry-led squads, because Fours before used to have Face Crack and how have I forgotten his name, dude? Hang on a moment. I'm refreshing. I need to.
It's the guy who just left the team. Yeah, extra power.
That's the one. Z Power. Yes. How could I forget Z Power, man? Yeah, so they used to have these two, and like Jerry wanted to keep that 5-man roster for the longest time. Like they just played together as that 5. And Z Power was fucking great, if you remember. And then like finally they make this swap happen because the results were just waning. If you remember, in 2019 there was actually a time where like Fours were kind of the second name in CIS next to Na'Vi. It was really cool. And then, you know, then the roster started to slip off as people started to learn their tendencies more, and like some of the little things that they like to do didn't work. And now they're on this rise again with the new players of Zorti and Kenzie, and it's looking like a good project again. But a part of me does feel like they are just destined to go the way of like this VP squad or Fours of old, where they're like a flash in the pan of some brilliance. And then once, you know, you start to figure it out a bit, there's not that like ability to stay on top and like keep it up, because it is hard, right? That's why it's so impressive that like Astralis had an era that spanned as long as it did, because you know you like to think, oh, you can just figure it out, like you said, like all these other IGLs aren't idiots, but it's all about like trying to innovate, and it just feels like with some of the CIS teams they get stuck in like that one identity that they have and like their one mantra, and then they don't actually move past that, and so it kind of starts to become, you know, predictable.
Go on, give your last thought.
I was just going to say that I think that whole style of having one player who goes in alone, even on CT side, like Yakinder or Art, it's also falling a little out of fashion. Like less and less teams are running it. Like Na'Vi is probably a bit of an exception because Boomish still does it a bit. But a lot of these teams are now so ready for it that if you try and do it on CT side, which is what a lot of these players were doing, like Arden, Yakinder famously did it a lot, you're just trading 1-for-1, and now it's just favorable for the Ts. Like it's not actually as beneficial as it used to be anymore, because you're not getting the 1-for-nothing or 2-for-1 anymore.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.